My name is Sarah Mitchell, and the last conversation I had with my mother came through a voicemail that arrived while I was completing a classified intelligence briefing at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. The message was brief and devastating. Your father passed away yesterday from complications following his surgery. The memorial service is scheduled for Thursday at Riverside Community Church. However, after considerable family discussion, we've decided it would be inappropriate for you to attend. Your presence would cause unnecessary disruption and draw unwanted attention during this difficult time. Please respect our wishes and do not contact us. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. 3 days later, as my family gathered to honor the man who had taught me everything about integrity and service, 2 Pentagon officials walked into that church and spoke words that would transform everything. "Excuse me, we're looking for General Mitchell." The voicemail from my mother, Linda Mitchell, had been left at 0234 hours on a Wednesday morning while I was conducting a strategic assessment briefing for NATO intelligence coordinators. My role as Senior Intelligence Analyst for European Operations required maintaining focus during extended briefings that could influence international security decisions. But the personal notification pierced through professional concentration like nothing I had experienced during 12 years of military service. My father, Colonel James Mitchell, United States Air Force retired, had undergone what was supposed to be routine cardiac surgery at Walter Reed Medical Center. The procedure had been scheduled weeks in advance, and our last conversation had been optimistic about his recovery timeline and plans for spending more time with the grandchildren he rarely saw. The sudden complications that led to his death remained unclear from my mother's brief message, but the finality was unmistakable. What devastated me more than the news of his death was the explicit prohibition against attending his memorial service. My own family was barring me from saying goodbye to the man who had shaped every principle I lived by, the person who had encouraged my military career when everyone else questioned whether a woman could succeed in intelligence operations. Standing in the secure briefing room at Ramstein, surrounded by classified materials and strategic assessments that would influence NATO operations across Eastern Europe, I found myself confronting a reality that seemed impossible to process. My professional responsibilities demanded immediate attention to emerging security threats, but my personal world had collapsed in ways that made those responsibilities feel abstract and meaningless. My commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel David Rodriguez, recognized immediately that something significant had occurred. His experience managing intelligence operations had taught him to identify when personnel were dealing with situations that could affect their operational effectiveness. "Mitchell, what's your status?" he asked, using the direct approach that characterized military leadership when personal and professional boundaries intersected. "My father died yesterday, sir," I replied, maintaining the controlled tone that 12 years of military training had made automatic. "Cardiac surgery complications at Walter Reed. My family has requested that I not attend the memorial service." Rodriguez was quiet for several moments, understanding that family dynamics during grief could create complications that went beyond standard bereavement protocols. Military families often struggled with the demands of service that kept personnel away during critical family moments. But the explicit request to avoid a funeral suggested deeper issues that extended beyond logistical challenges. "Do you need emergency leave?" "We can arrange transport within 6 hours if necessary," he offered, though his tone indicated he understood the situation was more complex than typical family emergencies. I looked down at my mother's voicemail transcript again, reading the words that somehow hurt more than any combat-related injury I had sustained during deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. "Negative, sir. Family has explicitly requested my absence. I am fully mission-capable and ready to continue with operational requirements." The expression on Rodriguez's face revealed his understanding that military service sometimes created family tensions that went beyond normal civilian comprehension. However, military protocol prevented him from inquiring further into personal matters unless they directly affected operational readiness and mission effectiveness. Growing up in Colorado Springs, I had been raised in a household where military service represented the highest form of public duty and personal honor. My father had served 28 years in the Air Force, rising through the ranks from enlisted airman to colonel, while specializing in strategic intelligence operations that took him to assignments around the world. My mother had been an Air Force wife who understood the sacrifices required by military families and took pride in the service that protected our nation's security interests. Our home had been filled with discussions about military history, strategic thinking, and the importance of serving something larger than personal interests. Family dinners included conversations about international relations, analysis of contemporary conflicts, and expectations that service to the country represented the most meaningful way to contribute to society. These conversations had shaped my understanding of duty, honor, and the responsibility that came with defending democratic values and American interests abroad. My older brother Marcus had followed our father into military service, completing 8 years as an Air Force logistics officer before transitioning to a civilian career in defense contracting. My younger sister Rebecca had chosen a different path, studying social work and dedicating her career to helping military families navigate the challenges of deployment, relocation, and reintegration that characterized military life. Both had married, started families, and settled into conventional suburban lives within driving distance of our childhood home. I had always been different from my siblings, in ways that my father seemed to appreciate, but that created increasing tension with other family members as my military career progressed. While Marcus excelled at following established procedures, and Rebecca found fulfillment in direct service to individuals and families, I had been drawn to complex analytical challenges, strategic innovation, and leadership responsibilities that required operating in ambiguous environments with incomplete information. During high school, while my classmates focused on college preparation and social activities, I had spent weekends studying military strategy, summer breaks attending civilian leadership programs offered through the Air Force Academy, and free time reading biographies of intelligence professionals who had shaped American security policy through analytical excellence and strategic thinking. My decision to attend the Air Force Academy rather than a traditional university had been supported enthusiastically by my father but received with mixed emotions from my mother and siblings. They respected military service and understood its importance, but they had hoped I would choose a career path that allowed for more conventional family life and fewer personal risks than intelligence operations typically required. My graduation from the Air Force Academy and commissioning as a second lieutenant in Air Force intelligence had been a moment of family pride, but it had also marked the beginning of a gradual divergence between my life choices and their expectations for my future. Intelligence specialization had led to assignments that required extensive travel, long deployments, and involvement in operations that could not be discussed with family members who lacked appropriate security clearances. Within 5 years, the gap between my daily reality and their understanding of my career had become substantial enough to create persistent tension during family gatherings. The conversations had evolved from expressions of concern about my safety to fundamental questions about whether military service was providing adequate personal fulfillment and opportunities for the kind of conventional life experiences they believed were essential for long-term happiness. The tension had escalated significantly as my military career advanced beyond what they had expected or understood. Promotions to captain, then major, then lieutenant colonel had come with increasing responsibilities, longer deployments, and involvement in operations that carried both higher strategic importance and greater personal risk. My family's discomfort with my military service had reached a critical point 2 years earlier when I had been selected for promotion to colonel and assigned to lead a classified intelligence unit responsible for counterintelligence operations in Europe and the Middle East. The promotion represented the culmination of 12 years of exceptional performance and strategic thinking that qualified me for the most challenging assignments available to intelligence professionals. However, it had also meant accepting responsibilities that would require even longer separations from family and involvement in operations that carried significant personal and professional consequences. During my last extended visit home, approximately 14 months before my father's death, the underlying tensions had finally erupted into open confrontation that would prove to be our final attempt at family reconciliation. My mother had organized what she described as a family meeting, where my siblings had been enlisted to convince me to leave military service and pursue what they considered a more appropriate career path that would allow for normal family relationships and conventional life experiences. "Sarah, you're 32 years old," my sister Rebecca had said, sitting across from me at our parents' kitchen table. "Most women your age are building careers that allow for marriage, children, and community involvement. You're missing the most important experiences of life, because you're completely absorbed in this military world that keeps you isolated from everything that really matters. My brother Marcus had approached the issue from a different perspective, questioning whether military service was providing adequate financial security and career advancement opportunities compared to civilian alternatives that would offer greater earning potential and professional flexibility. I respect what you've accomplished, and I understand the appeal of military service, he had said. But there comes a point where you have to think practically about your future. Defense contracting offers similar work with better compensation and the ability to maintain normal personal relationships. Even my father, who had previously supported my military career unconditionally, had expressed concerns about the direction my service had taken. "Sarah, I'm proud of your achievements and your dedication to duty," he had said carefully. "But your mother and siblings are worried about the personal cost of your level of commitment. Perhaps it's time to consider whether you've accomplished what you set out to achieve and whether transitioning to civilian work might provide better balance between professional satisfaction and personal fulfillment." I had attempted to explain that my work involved preventing terrorist attacks, protecting American assets abroad, and contributing to international security in ways that few people were qualified or willing to undertake. I had described the intellectual satisfaction of leading analytical teams that solved complex intelligence puzzles, the strategic importance of operations that protected civilian populations, and the sense of purpose that came from knowing my service made a genuine difference in global security and American interests. Their response had been dismissive and condescending in ways that revealed fundamental misunderstandings about the nature of intelligence work and its importance to national security. My mother had suggested that I was using military service to avoid the responsibilities of normal adult life and conventional relationships. My siblings had implied that my commitment to duty was actually selfishness disguised as patriotism, a way of avoiding the emotional investments that sustained family relationships and community connections required. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The conversation had concluded with my mother delivering what amounted to an ultimatum. Choose between continued military advancement and maintaining family relationships that required demonstrating greater commitment to personal connections and conventional life priorities. She had made clear that my continued focus on military excellence would result in gradual estrangement from family gatherings, holiday celebrations, and the support network that they believed I would eventually need when my military phase ended. I had chosen military service, understanding that the decision would likely result in the kind of family estrangement that had now culminated in my exclusion from my father's memorial service. For the following 14 months, communication with my family had become increasingly formal and infrequent. Phone calls had been reduced to brief exchanges about health updates and logistical matters. Holiday visits had been skipped due to operational requirements that my family interpreted as deliberate avoidance. The gap between my life and their understanding had widened to the point where we existed in completely separate worlds that intersected only through obligation rather than genuine connection or mutual understanding. My father's death had occurred while I was conducting intelligence operations that protected the very freedoms and security that allowed my family to maintain their comfortable civilian lifestyle and express their disappointment with my career choices. Now, as I prepared my gear for continued operations in Germany, I found myself reflecting on the fundamental disconnect between military service realities and civilian expectations about priorities, relationships, and meaningful contribution to society. The irony was profound and painful. The values my father had taught me about duty, honor, and service to others had led to military achievements that my family now considered incompatible with their understanding of appropriate life choices and personal priorities. The operation that consumed my attention during the days following my father's death involved tracking a sophisticated cyber-terrorism network that had been infiltrating NATO communication systems across 7 European countries. My team at Ramstein had identified patterns in network intrusions that suggested coordinated attacks designed to compromise classified military communications during a critical period of international tensions in the Baltic region. The investigation required analyzing thousands of data packets, correlating communication patterns across multiple time zones, and coordinating with intelligence agencies from allied nations, whose cooperation was essential for understanding the full scope of the threat. Each day brought new evidence that the cyber attacks were more extensive and strategically coordinated than initial assessments had indicated. My role as senior intelligence analyst meant synthesizing complex technical information into strategic assessments that would guide NATO response protocols and defensive measures. The work demanded 18-hour days, constant vigilance for emerging threat indicators, and decision-making that could affect the security of military communications across the entire European theater of operations. The intellectual challenge of cyber intelligence analysis provided the kind of complex problem-solving that had drawn me to intelligence work throughout my career. Each data point required careful evaluation within broader patterns of hostile activity, and successful analysis demanded combining technical expertise with strategic understanding of adversary capabilities and intentions. However, conducting this critical work while processing the emotional impact of my father's death and family rejection created psychological pressures that were difficult to compartmentalize. The secure communication facilities where I spent most of my time became a refuge from personal grief. But they also emphasized the isolation that characterized both my professional and personal circumstances. My team consisted of 12 intelligence specialists from various NATO countries, each bringing unique technical capabilities and regional expertise to the investigation. Master Sergeant Jennifer Walsh, my senior enlisted analyst, had 15 years of experience in cyber intelligence operations and possessed an intuitive understanding of network security vulnerabilities that complemented my strategic assessment capabilities. Captain Hans Müller from German military intelligence provided essential liaison with European Union security agencies, whose cooperation was crucial for tracking network intrusions across national boundaries. His linguistic capabilities and understanding of European bureaucratic processes enabled coordination that would have been impossible through formal diplomatic channels alone. Lieutenant Commander Sofia Petrov, on assignment from Bulgarian military intelligence, brought expertise in Eastern European cyber warfare techniques that proved essential for understanding the operational signatures we were observing in the network traffic analysis. Her background in studying Russian and Chinese cyber operations provided contextual knowledge that shaped our assessment of adversary capabilities and strategic objectives. Working with this international team provided intellectual stimulation and professional camaraderie that partially compensated for the personal isolation that had resulted from family estrangement. The shared commitment to protecting NATO security interests created bonds based on mutual respect for specialized expertise, rather than conventional social connections that civilian relationships typically required. The investigation revealed that the cyber attacks were far more sophisticated than typical criminal hacking operations or amateur cyber terrorism activities. The network intrusion patterns demonstrated advanced persistent threat characteristics that suggested state-sponsored intelligence operations designed to compromise NATO communication security during a period of heightened tensions with Russia over Baltic defense arrangements. The technical sophistication of the attacks included zero-day exploits targeting previously unknown vulnerabilities in classified communication systems, coordinated timing across multiple network nodes to maximize disruption, and evidence destruction protocols that eliminated traces of intrusion activity before security systems could detect and respond to unauthorized access. My analysis indicated that the cyber operations were likely conducted by a hybrid threat network combining state intelligence resources with criminal hacking capabilities and ideologically motivated cyber terrorists who provided operational flexibility and plausible deniability for the sponsoring nation-state. This assessment had profound implications for NATO response protocols and defensive strategies. The strategic significance of our investigation extended beyond immediate network security concerns to fundamental questions about alliance resilience and collective defense capabilities in cyber warfare environments. Successful compromise of NATO communication systems could undermine alliance coordination during crisis situations and create vulnerabilities that adversaries could exploit during conventional military conflicts. Preparing intelligence briefings for senior NATO commanders required distilling complex technical analysis into strategic assessments that non-technical decision-makers could understand and act upon. The challenge involved explaining cyber warfare implications without overwhelming military leaders whose expertise focused on conventional operational planning rather than digital threat environments. The most significant briefing of the investigation was scheduled for NATO's Supreme Allied Command, where my assessment would inform alliance-wide defensive measures and potentially influence diplomatic responses to state-sponsored cyber attacks. The responsibility for providing accurate intelligence that could affect international relations and military preparedness was both professionally fulfilling and personally daunting. During the 72 hours of intensive preparation for the NATO briefing, I found myself working continuously in the secure intelligence facility, sustained by military-grade coffee and the kind of focused determination that had characterized my approach to every major challenge throughout my career. The work provided complete distraction from personal grief while contributing to security objectives that justified the personal sacrifices that military service required. The technical aspects of the investigation involved forensic analysis of network logs that contained millions of data entries, each requiring evaluation for potential indicators of hostile activity. Pattern recognition algorithms helped identify anomalous traffic, but human analysis was essential for understanding the strategic significance of observed intrusion attempts and their relationship to broader adversary objectives. Master Sergeant Walsh had developed innovative analysis techniques that combined traditional cyber forensics with behavioral profiling of hacker organizations. Her methods enabled identifying operational signatures that could distinguish between different threat actors even when they employed similar technical approaches. This capability proved crucial for understanding whether we were tracking a single coordinated operation or multiple independent threat networks. The international cooperation required for the investigation provided insights into alliance intelligence sharing procedures that extended beyond formal NATO protocols. Effective cyber threat analysis demanded real-time information exchange that bureaucratic processes could not accommodate, requiring personal relationships and professional trust that transcended national boundaries and organizational hierarchies. Captain Muller's connections within German intelligence agencies provided access to network monitoring data that formal intelligence sharing agreements would have required weeks to obtain through official channels. His willingness to bypass bureaucratic procedures reflected the kind of operational flexibility that made international cooperation effective during time-sensitive investigations. Lieutenant Commander Petrov's expertise in Eastern European threat networks enabled contextual analysis that transformed isolated technical indicators into comprehensive understanding of adversary capabilities and strategic objectives. Her insights regarding Russian cyber warfare doctrine provided essential background for assessing whether observed network intrusions represented intelligence collection, preparation for future attacks, or active measures designed to influence NATO decision-making processes. The collaborative analysis process revealed how effective intelligence work required combining individual expertise with collective problem-solving approaches that could address complex challenges beyond the capabilities of any single analyst or national intelligence organization. The success of our investigation depended on professional relationships based on mutual respect for specialized knowledge rather than hierarchical authority structures. Working 18-hour days in the secure facility also meant limited communication with the outside world and virtually no contact with personal relationships or family connections. The operational security requirements that protected our investigation also enforced the kind of social isolation that had characterized my military career and contributed to family tensions that had culminated in my exclusion from my father's memorial service. The irony of conducting critical security work while being rejected by my own family was not lost on me during the quiet moments between analysis sessions. I was protecting alliance security interests and potentially preventing cyber attacks that could affect millions of civilian and military personnel, but my own family considered my dedication to this work incompatible with normal human relationships and social responsibilities. The emotional complexity of this situation was particularly acute during the evening hours when the secure facility became quiet and the immediate demands of technical analysis provided less distraction from personal loss and family rejection. The combination of professional fulfillment and personal isolation created psychological pressures that were difficult to process within the constraints of operational security and mission requirements. Physical fitness routines became essential for managing stress and maintaining cognitive performance during the extended investigation. The base gymnasium provided opportunities for exercise that helped process psychological tension, while maintaining the physical conditioning that military service required. However, even these activities emphasized the institutional structure that separated military life from civilian social connections. The approaching deadline for the NATO briefing created additional pressure to produce intelligence assessments that would justify the extensive resources devoted to the investigation. Senior commanders expected clear conclusions and specific recommendations for defensive measures. But the technical complexity of cyber warfare made definitive assessments challenging, even with extensive analysis and international cooperation. The weight of responsibility for providing accurate intelligence that could influence alliance security policies was both professionally challenging and personally meaningful. This was exactly the kind of strategic contribution that had drawn me to intelligence work and justified the personal sacrifices that military service required, even when those sacrifices included family estrangement and social isolation that civilian careers typically did not demand. The breakthrough in our cyber investigation came at 03:47 hours on the morning of my father's memorial service, when Lieutenant Commander Petrov identified a critical vulnerability in the attack pattern that revealed the true scope of the threat network. Her discovery changed everything we thought we understood about the cyber operations and their strategic objectives. Working through the night shift when most of the base was asleep, Petrov had been analyzing communication metadata from Bulgarian intelligence sources when she noticed an anomaly in timing sequences that previous analysis had overlooked. The pattern suggested that the cyber attacks were not random probing attempts, but carefully orchestrated operations designed to map NATO communication protocols for a specific future operation. "Sarah, you need to see this immediately," she said, her voice carrying the tension that came with discovering intelligence that could change strategic assessments. The secure workstation displayed network traffic analysis that revealed coordination between multiple threat actors across a timeline that suggested preparation for imminent large-scale operations. The data indicated that the cyber intrusions were reconnaissance missions designed to identify communication vulnerabilities that could be exploited during a coordinated attack on NATO infrastructure. The timing patterns suggested that the reconnaissance phase was nearly complete, and that the operational phase could begin within days or weeks rather than the months that our previous assessments had predicted. This discovery transformed our investigation from a defensive cybersecurity operation into an urgent counterintelligence mission with immediate strategic implications. The threat network was not simply attempting to steal classified information, but was preparing to disrupt NATO communication capabilities during what appeared to be a planned crisis or conflict scenario. The intelligence required immediate briefing to NATO command structure and coordination with national intelligence agencies, whose defensive measures would need radical updating based on our new understanding of the threat timeline and operational scope. The work that had consumed my attention during my father's final days was suddenly revealed to be far more critical than any of us had realized. Master Sergeant Walsh immediately began preparing emergency briefing materials, while Captain Muller initiated contact with German intelligence agencies whose networks showed similar intrusion patterns. The coordinated response required abandoning normal briefing schedules and security protocols in favor of emergency communication procedures that could alert NATO commanders to the imminent threat. My responsibility for synthesizing the new intelligence into actionable strategic assessments meant that the morning of my father's memorial service would be consumed by the most critical briefing of my military career. The timing created an impossible conflict between professional duty and personal grief that epitomized the choices that had led to my family estrangement. The secure communication facility became a center of intense activity, as intelligence analysts from multiple NATO countries worked to understand the full implications of Petrov's discovery. Encrypted communications with Washington, London, Berlin, and other Allied capitals created a constant stream of urgent traffic as political and military leaders evaluated response options. The strategic assessment that emerged from our analysis indicated that the cyber operations were likely preparation for a coordinated attack on Baltic defense communications that could occur in conjunction with conventional military pressure on Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. The cyber warfare component would disable NATO's ability to coordinate defensive responses, while conventional forces created fait accompli situations that alliance decision-making processes could not address effectively. This assessment had profound implications for NATO readiness postures and alliance response protocols. If our analysis was correct, the alliance faced a sophisticated hybrid warfare campaign that combined cyber attacks with conventional military pressure in ways that existing defensive planning had not adequately anticipated. The emergency briefing for NATO Supreme Allied Command was scheduled for 1,400 hours, exactly the time when my father's memorial service was beginning at Riverside Community Church in Colorado Springs. The professional responsibility for providing critical intelligence that could affect alliance security took precedence over personal grief. But the symbolic significance of the timing was not lost on me. While my family gathered to honor my father's memory, I would be briefing senior military commanders about threats that could affect the security of everything he had spent his career defending. The irony was both profound and painful. My dedication to continuing his legacy of service was preventing me from participating in commemorating that legacy with the family that had shaped its foundation. The briefing preparation required distilling complex technical analysis into strategic presentations that could guide immediate policy decisions. Senior commanders needed clear assessments of threat capabilities, timeline estimates for potential attacks, and specific recommendations for defensive measures that could protect NATO communication systems. The challenge involved explaining cyber warfare implications to military leaders whose experience focused primarily on conventional operations. The abstract nature of digital threats made it difficult to convey the physical consequences that successful cyber attacks could create for alliance defensive capabilities and civilian infrastructure. Captain Muller's expertise in German defense planning provided essential context for understanding how cyber attacks could affect alliance coordination during crisis scenarios. His analysis revealed that successful compromise of communication systems could create decision-making delays that would provide adversaries with strategic advantages during the critical early phases of hybrid warfare campaigns. Lieutenant Commander Petrov's insights into Eastern European threat assessment methodologies enabled understanding adversaries' strategic thinking that went beyond technical capabilities to include operational timing and political objectives. Her assessment suggested that the cyber operations were coordinated with broader destabilization efforts that included disinformation campaigns and economic pressure tactics. The comprehensive threat assessment that emerged from our collaborative analysis painted a picture of sophisticated hybrid warfare planning that exceeded the complexity of any previous cyber threat scenarios that NATO had confronted. The scale and coordination of the operations suggested state-level resources and strategic planning that traditional counterterrorism approaches were not designed to address. Working through the morning hours while knowing that my father's memorial service was approaching created emotional complexity that was difficult to compartmentalize. The professional fulfillment of contributing to critical intelligence work was overshadowed by the realization that family estrangement had reached the point where duty obligations would prevent me from participating in honoring the person who had inspired my commitment to service. The secure facility's isolation from external communication meant that I could not even follow the memorial service remotely or receive updates about family gathering that was occurring without my presence. The operational security requirements that protected our investigation also enforced complete disconnection from personal relationships and family connections during one of the most significant days of my emotional life. Master Sergeant Walsh, who had worked with me for 18 months and understood the family tensions that affected my personal circumstances, approached me during a brief break in briefing preparation. "Colonel, I know today is difficult for personal reasons," she said carefully. "Your professionalism under these circumstances reflects exactly the kind of leadership that your father would have been proud of." Her acknowledgement of the personal sacrifice that duty required was the only recognition I would receive that day for the choice between family obligations and professional responsibilities. Military culture understood such sacrifices as inevitable aspects of service, but the understanding did not diminish the emotional cost of missing my father's final farewell. The final briefing materials included classified assessments that demonstrated how cyber warfare capabilities could affect conventional military operations in ways that traditional defense planning had not adequately considered. The integration of digital and physical threats represented evolution in warfare that required corresponding adaptation in alliance strategy and defensive capabilities. The intelligence products that we delivered to NATO Command represented synthesis of technical analysis, strategic assessment, and international cooperation that exemplified the kind of complex problem-solving that had drawn me to intelligence work. The professional satisfaction of contributing to alliance security was profound, but it came at personal costs that civilian careers rarely demanded. As 1,400 hours approached and the NATO briefing began, I knew that my family was gathering at Riverside Community Church to share memories, offer condolences, and provide mutual support during their time of grief. The ceremony would include military honors reflecting my father's 28 years of Air Force service, but his daughter would not be present to witness the recognition of the values that had shaped both our lives. The briefing room at NATO's Supreme Allied Command contained senior military officers from 12 alliance countries whose decisions would be influenced by our intelligence assessment. The responsibility for providing accurate analysis that could affect international security policy was exactly the kind of strategic contribution that justified the personal sacrifices that military service required. However, standing before those commanders while my father was being memorialized 3,000 miles away created emotional complexity that was difficult to process within the professional demeanor that military leadership demanded. The choice between duty and family had been made, but the consequences would affect every aspect of my personal and professional identity for years to come. The intelligence briefing that followed would prove to be the most significant of my military career, with implications that extended far beyond the immediate cyber threat assessment to fundamental questions about alliance security and hybrid warfare capabilities. But the professional triumph occurred against the backdrop of personal loss that military service had both caused and prevented me from properly grieving. The NATO Supreme Allied Command briefing room contained 23 senior military officers from 12 alliance countries, each carrying responsibility for decisions that could affect the security of over 900 million civilians across Europe and North America. The weight of that responsibility settled on my shoulders as I approached the podium with classified materials that would fundamentally alter alliance defensive strategies. General Patricia Hawkins, United States Air Force, served as Supreme Allied Commander and brought 32 years of operational experience to her assessment of emerging security threats. Her reputation for strategic thinking and operational excellence had earned respect throughout the alliance military structure, and her evaluation of our intelligence assessment would influence policy decisions at the highest levels of NATO leadership. Admiral Sir Geoffrey Morrison, Royal Navy, represented United Kingdom defense interests and possessed extensive experience in maritime security operations that provided unique perspectives on hybrid warfare implications for alliance logistics and supply chains. His understanding of economic warfare tactics would prove crucial for evaluating the broader strategic context of the cyber operations we had identified. General Klaus Weber from the German Bundeswehr had commanded NATO operations in Eastern Europe and understood the political complexities that surrounded Baltic defense arrangements. His insights into Russian strategic thinking and regional security dynamics were essential for assessing adversary objectives and timeline estimates for potential military operations. The briefing began with technical analysis of the cyber intrusion patterns that Lieutenant Commander Petrov had identified during her overnight investigation. The presentation required explaining complex network security concepts to senior officers whose expertise focused on conventional military operations rather than digital warfare environments. The coordinated timing of these network reconnaissance operations indicates systematic mapping of NATO communication vulnerabilities, I explained, displaying network traffic analysis that revealed intrusion attempts across 17 different alliance communication nodes. The pattern suggests preparation for simultaneous attacks designed to disrupt command and control capabilities during a crisis scenario. General Hawkins interrupted with the kind of direct questioning that characterized senior military leadership when evaluating intelligence assessments that could influence major policy decisions. Colonel Mitchell, what confidence level do you assign to your assessment that these operations represent preparation for imminent attacks rather than routine intelligence collection? The question required balancing analytical rigor with operational urgency in ways that intelligence professionals constantly navigated when providing assessments to decision-makers who needed actionable intelligence rather than academic analysis. Based on the technical sophistication and coordination patterns observed, I assess with high confidence that these operations exceed normal intelligence collection parameters and indicate preparation for operational cyber attacks within a 60 to 90-day timeframe. Admiral Morrison focused on maritime implications that could affect alliance logistics and reinforcement capabilities. How would successful communication disruption affect our ability to coordinate defensive operations across multiple theaters simultaneously? This question addressed the heart of alliance vulnerability to cyber warfare tactics that could create strategic advantages for adversaries without requiring conventional military confrontation. Sir's successful compromise of NATO communication systems could create decision-making delays that would provide adversaries with operational windows for fait accompli scenarios in the Baltic region. The strategic implications of this assessment were immediately apparent to every senior officer in the briefing room. NATO's collective defense arrangements depended on rapid communication and coordinated response capabilities that cyberattacks could eliminate, without triggering traditional defensive measures or escalation protocols. General Weber raised concerns about political implications that extended beyond military considerations, to include alliance solidarity and public support for collective defense measures. Colonel, how do we distinguish between cyber reconnaissance operations and actual attack preparation when recommending defensive measures that could affect civilian infrastructure and economic systems? This question highlighted the challenge of responding to hybrid warfare tactics that operated below traditional thresholds for military retaliation, while creating cumulative effects that could achieve strategic objectives without conventional conflict. The legal and political complexities of cyber warfare made defensive responses more challenging than conventional military planning typically required. General, the technical indicators suggest that we are observing preparation phases for attacks rather than routine intelligence collection, I replied. The network mapping patterns indicate systematic vulnerability assessment that exceeds defensive requirements and suggests offensive operational planning. The briefing continued with detailed analysis of specific technical indicators that supported our assessment of imminent threat development. Master Sergeant Walsh had prepared comprehensive documentation of network intrusion signatures that demonstrated coordination between multiple threat actors operating across national boundaries. Captain Muller's contribution focused on German intelligence assessments that corroborated our analysis while providing additional context about similar operations observed in other European Union member countries. The broader pattern suggested alliance-wide vulnerability assessment that exceeded any single nation's defense capabilities. Lieutenant Commander Petrov presented Bulgarian intelligence analysis that revealed Eastern European perspectives on Russian hybrid warfare doctrine and its application to NATO defensive vulnerabilities. Her insights into adversary strategic thinking provided essential context for understanding operational objectives and timing considerations. The collaborative intelligence presentation demonstrated how effective alliance security required combining national capabilities with international cooperation that could address complex threats beyond any single country's analytical capacity. The success of our investigation reflected the kind of professional relationships and institutional cooperation that made NATO collective defense arrangements effective. However, the briefing also revealed fundamental gaps in alliance preparedness for hybrid warfare scenarios that combined cyber attacks with conventional military pressure in ways that existing defensive planning had not adequately anticipated. The strategic challenge involved developing response protocols that could address distributed threats without creating escalation dynamics that adversaries could exploit. General Hawkins concluded the formal briefing session with strategic guidance that would shape alliance response measures and resource allocation decisions. This assessment requires immediate coordination with national intelligence agencies and defensive preparation that assumes attack implementation within your estimated time frame. The directive meant that our intelligence analysis would influence NATO defensive postures and potentially affect diplomatic relations with countries identified as sources of the cyber threat networks. The responsibility for providing accurate assessment that could influence international security policy was both professionally fulfilling and personally daunting. Admiral Morrison requested additional analysis of maritime communication vulnerabilities that could affect alliance reinforcement capabilities during Baltic crisis scenarios. The naval implications of cyber warfare attacks extended beyond communication disruption to include navigation systems and logistics coordination that maritime operations required. General Weber emphasized the importance of coordinating defensive measures with European Union security agencies, whose cooperation would be essential for protecting civilian infrastructure that supported military communication systems. The integration of military and civilian cybersecurity required political coordination that extended beyond traditional defense planning. The post-briefing discussion revealed how complex international security challenges required expertise that transcended traditional military specializations and national boundaries. Effective threat assessment demanded combining technical analysis with strategic thinking and political understanding that could navigate alliance relationships and decision-making processes. Walking back to the secure intelligence facility after the briefing, I felt the profound satisfaction that came from contributing to alliance security in ways that justified the personal sacrifices that military service demanded. The professional recognition from senior NATO commanders validated 12 years of preparation and expertise development. However, the timing of this career-defining achievement with my father's memorial service created emotional complexity that was difficult to process. While delivering the most important briefing of my military career, my family was concluding their ceremony honoring the person who had inspired my commitment to service and strategic thinking. Master Sergeant Walsh approached me as we secured classified materials and prepared to return to routine intelligence operations. "Colonel, that briefing will influence NATO policy for years to come," she said. "Your analysis may have prevented a successful hybrid warfare campaign that could have destabilized the entire alliance structure." Her recognition of the strategic significance of our work provided some consolation for missing my father's memorial service, but it could not eliminate the personal cost of choosing professional duty over family obligations. The choice reflected values that my father had taught me about service and responsibility, but it had also contributed to family estrangement that prevented sharing this achievement with people whose approval I valued most. The secure communication facility returned to normal operational tempo following the emergency briefing, but the intelligence products we had delivered would continue influencing alliance security measures and international diplomatic efforts for months or years to come. The work represented exactly the kind of strategic contribution that had drawn me to intelligence analysis and justified the personal sacrifices that military excellence required. However, the professional triumph occurred against the backdrop of family rejection that made personal celebration impossible. The isolation that characterized both my professional environment and personal circumstances created a form of success that was meaningful but incomplete in ways that civilian achievements rarely experienced. The afternoon hours following the NATO briefing were consumed by follow-up analysis and coordination with national intelligence agencies whose defensive measures would implement our threat assessment recommendations. The work provided continued distraction from personal grief while contributing to security objectives that protected the freedoms and stability that civilian populations, including my family, took for granted. The encrypted message that arrived 2 days after the NATO briefing carried classification markings I had never seen before in 12 years of intelligence work. The communication originated from a Pentagon office that didn't appear in any organizational directory, and the authentication codes required clearance levels that exceeded my current access authorization. Director of Special Access Programs Dr. Elizabeth Thornton had requested an immediate secure video conference to discuss matters relating to classified research initiatives requiring specialized analytical expertise. The formal language concealed the urgency that characterized emergency communications, but the timing suggested connection to our recent cyber threat assessment. The secure video facility at Ramstein required additional security protocols for communications involving special access programs, including biometric authentication and signal encryption that prevented any possibility of interception or recording. The level of security suggested that the conversation would involve information compartmentalized beyond normal intelligence classifications. Dr. Thornton appeared on the secure monitor as a professional woman in her 50s, whose bearing suggested extensive experience managing classified programs that operated outside conventional military structures. Her credentials included advanced degrees in computer science and international relations, along with 25 years of experience overseeing defense research initiatives that bridged military and civilian technology development. Colonel Mitchell, your recent NATO assessment regarding hybrid cyber warfare threats has drawn attention at the highest levels of defense leadership, she began without preliminary conversation. Your analysis demonstrated analytical capabilities and strategic thinking that suggest qualification for special access programs that few intelligence professionals are cleared to know about. The statement indicated that our cyber threat investigation had implications beyond alliance security concerns to include domestic defense programs that required exceptional secrecy and specialized expertise. Special access programs typically involved emerging technologies or strategic capabilities that conventional military structures were not equipped to handle. Your father, Colonel James Mitchell, held special access clearances during the final 8 years of his Air Force career, Dr. Thornton continued. His work involved classified research programs that remain active and require analytical expertise that combines technical understanding with strategic assessment capabilities. This revelation transformed my understanding of my father's military service and suggested that his support for my intelligence career had been influenced by knowledge of classified programs that could utilize my analytical capabilities. The timing of this disclosure, immediately following his death, indicated that his security clearances had prevented him from discussing aspects of his work that were relevant to my career development. Colonel Mitchell, we need to discuss your father's legacy within the Special Access Program community and opportunities for continuing research initiatives that he helped establish, Dr. Thornton said. However, this conversation requires in-person briefing at classified facilities that cannot be discussed through any electronic communication medium. The request for immediate travel to Washington suggested that the matter involved time-sensitive developments that could not wait for routine scheduling and administrative processes. Special access programs operated according to different timelines and urgency levels than conventional military assignments, reflecting their strategic importance and security requirements. Dr. Thornton, my current assignment involves ongoing cyber threat analysis that requires my presence at Ramstein for coordination with NATO intelligence agencies, I replied. Request guidance regarding timeline and priority level for proposed briefing. Her response indicated that the Special Access Program requirements took precedence over conventional military assignments, regardless of their strategic importance. Colonel, your immediate presence is required for briefings that affect national security at levels that exceed your current assignment scope. Transportation will be arranged through channels that do not appear in normal military logistics systems. The conversation concluded with instructions for discrete departure procedures that would not alert normal intelligence oversight systems to my temporary absence from Ramstein. The operational security measures suggested that special access programs maintained independence from conventional military command structures that could compromise program secrecy. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez understood immediately that my departure involved classified matters beyond his clearance level when I requested emergency leave for family matters requiring immediate attention in the continental United States. His experience with special operations personnel had taught him to recognize when subordinates were involved in activities that required minimal official documentation and maximum operational discretion. Mitchell, your cyber threat analysis work has been exemplary, and your team can maintain operational effectiveness during temporary absence, he said. Take whatever time is necessary for family obligations and coordinate the return timeline through appropriate channels. His carefully worded response indicated understanding that family matters likely involved classified activities that conventional military communication could not acknowledge directly. The professional trust that characterized special operations leadership enabled flexibility for personnel whose expertise qualified them for assignments beyond normal command structures. The flight to Washington occurred through military transport that bypassed normal passenger processing and security procedures. The aircraft carried no identifying markings and operated according to flight plans that did not appear in conventional air traffic control systems. The operational security reflected the level of compartmentalization that surrounded special access programs. Dr. Thornton met me at a secure facility located 30 minutes from downtown Washington, in a complex that appeared to be a conventional office building, but contained security systems and communication equipment that exceeded anything I had encountered during 12 years of intelligence work. The building directory listed civilian companies whose business activities provided cover for defense research programs. Colonel Mitchell, your father spent the final 8 years of his career contributing to research programs that are just now reaching operational implementation phases, she explained as we walked through corridors that required multiple security checkpoints and biometric authentication. His work involved strategic analysis of emerging threats that conventional intelligence services were not equipped to identify or assess. The briefing room contained classified materials that revealed the scope of research programs that had been operating for decades without public knowledge or conventional military oversight. The documents indicated that my father had contributed to strategic assessments that influenced defense policies and technology development programs affecting national security at fundamental levels. The cyber threat analysis that you conducted for NATO represents exactly the kind of strategic thinking that these programs require, Dr. Thornton continued. Your ability to identify patterns and assess implications demonstrated analytical capabilities that few intelligence professionals possess. The classified briefing materials revealed that the cyber threats we had identified at Ramstein were components of broader adversary campaigns that included psychological operations, economic warfare, and political influence activities designed to undermine alliance solidarity and democratic institutions. The scope of these hybrid warfare operations exceeded anything that conventional intelligence analysis had previously documented. Your father's research focused on developing analytical frameworks for understanding hybrid threats that combine multiple forms of warfare in ways that traditional military doctrine was not designed to address, she explained. His work provided foundational analysis for defense programs that are now essential for national security. The revelation that my father had been involved in cutting-edge defense research programs that remained classified years after his retirement transformed my understanding of his military career and his support for my intelligence specialization. His encouragement of my analytical development had been influenced by knowledge of programs that could utilize capabilities that conventional military assignments might not fully develop. Dr. Thornton, what specific role would my analytical capabilities serve within these research programs? I asked, understanding that the briefing was leading toward assignment opportunities that would require fundamental changes in my career trajectory and personal circumstances. Colonel, we need analytical expertise that can bridge conventional military intelligence with emerging threat assessment that requires understanding technological, political, and economic factors that traditional intelligence services treat as separate disciplines, she replied. Your NATO assessment demonstrated exactly this kind of integrated analytical thinking. The classified materials revealed research programs that operated at the intersection of military intelligence, technology development, and strategic policy analysis. The work required understanding adversary capabilities that transcended conventional military threats to include information warfare, economic manipulation, and technological competition that could affect national security without triggering traditional defensive responses. Your father believed that you possessed analytical capabilities that would be essential for addressing threats that conventional military structures were not equipped to handle, Dr. Thornton said. His recommendations within the Special Access Program community identified you as a candidate for assignments that require exceptional clearance levels and analytical expertise. This disclosure indicated that my father had been advocating for my involvement in classified programs throughout my military career, using his knowledge of my capabilities and the requirements of advanced defense research to influence assignment opportunities that I had never known existed. The timing of this briefing, immediately following your father's death, reflects program requirements that security protocols prevented him from discussing while he was alive, she explained. His contributions to these programs remain active and require continuation by analysts who can understand and extend his strategic thinking. The emotional impact of learning that my father had been working to advance my career through channels I had never known about was profound and complicated. His support for my military service had been based on knowledge of opportunities and responsibilities that exceeded anything I had imagined possible during 12 years of conventional intelligence work. Dr. Thornton, what would acceptance of these assignment opportunities require in terms of career changes and personal circumstances? I asked. Understanding that special access programs demanded sacrifices and commitments that exceeded normal military service requirements. Colonel, these programs require total dedication and security measures that affect every aspect of personal and professional life, she replied honestly. The work provides opportunities for strategic contribution that few people ever experience, but the personal costs are substantial and permanent. The choice being offered represented exactly the kind of career opportunity that my father had hoped I would eventually qualify for, but it also meant accepting isolation and security restrictions that would make family reconciliation impossible even if my relatives were willing to overcome their current estrangement. The classified briefing room deep within the Pentagon facility contained documents that revealed the true scope of modern warfare and America's response to threats that the public would never know existed. Dr. Thornton spread across the conference table materials marked with security classifications that exceeded anything in my previous experience, each folder representing years of research into adversary capabilities that conventional military planning could not address. Project Sentinel represents the culmination of your father's analytical work and strategic thinking, she began, opening a folder that contained research spanning 15 years of technological development and threat assessment. The program focuses on predictive analysis of hybrid warfare campaigns that combine cyber attacks, economic manipulation, psychological operations, and political influence activities into coordinated strategies designed to undermine democratic institutions without triggering military responses. The scope of Project Sentinel exceeded anything I had encountered during 12 years of conventional intelligence work. The research revealed adversary capabilities that operated below traditional thresholds for military retaliation, while achieving strategic objectives that conventional warfare could not accomplish without massive costs and international consequences. Your father's contribution involved developing analytical frameworks that could identify emerging threat patterns before they reached operational phases, Dr. Thornton continued. His methodology combined signals intelligence, economic analysis, and behavioral assessment to create predictive models that enabled proactive responses rather than reactive damage control. The classified documents revealed that my father had been working on exactly the kind of integrated threat analysis that our NATO cyber investigation had demonstrated was essential for understanding contemporary security challenges. His research had anticipated the hybrid warfare capabilities that we had identified in the Baltic threat assessment by several years. Colonel Mitchell, your recent work at Ramstein validated analytical approaches that your father helped develop within Project Sentinel, she explained. Your ability to synthesize technical intelligence with strategic assessment demonstrated exactly the capabilities that this program requires for next phase development. The revelation that my NATO briefing had been a practical demonstration of my father's theoretical research created profound connections between his legacy and my potential future that I had never imagined. His support for my intelligence career had been influenced by understanding that my analytical capabilities could contribute to defense programs that operated at the highest levels of national security. Dr. Thornton, what specific responsibilities would Project Sentinel assignment involve? I asked, understanding that the briefing was leading toward career opportunities that would fundamentally alter my professional trajectory and personal circumstances. The program requires leading analytical teams that assess global threat development across multiple domains simultaneously, she replied. Your responsibilities would include coordinating intelligence collection, developing predictive assessments, and briefing senior government officials whose policy decisions depend on understanding adversary strategies that conventional intelligence services cannot adequately analyze. The position description represented exactly the kind of strategic analytical work that had drawn me to intelligence specialization, but operating at levels of responsibility and classification that exceeded anything available through conventional military career progression. The opportunity promised intellectual challenges and strategic contribution that could justify any personal sacrifices that acceptance might require. Project Sentinel operates independently from normal military command structures and requires security clearances that affect every aspect of personal life, Dr. Thornton continued. Personnel assigned to the program maintain civilian cover identities while conducting analysis that influences policy decisions at the highest levels of government. The operational requirements meant abandoning conventional military career progression in favor of deep cover assignments that would provide unlimited analytical resources while requiring complete disconnection from normal social relationships and family connections. The work promised maximum professional fulfillment at the cost of total personal isolation. Your father understood that Project Sentinel assignment would require sacrifices that few people are willing to make, she said. His recommendations emphasized your analytical capabilities while acknowledging that the personal costs would be substantial and irreversible. This disclosure revealed that my father had been weighing my potential contribution to national security against the personal sacrifices that such contribution would demand. His knowledge of both my capabilities and the program requirements had influenced his perspective on family tensions that had culminated in my exclusion from his memorial service. Dr. Thornton, how would Project Sentinel assignment affect my current family circumstances? I asked, though the answer was already apparent from the security requirements and operational demands she had described. Colonel, acceptance would require permanent severance of family relationships and social connections that could compromise operational security, she replied directly. Project Sentinel personnel maintain no contact with previous personal relationships and operate under cover identities that preclude normal civilian social engagement. The requirement for complete social isolation represented the ultimate extension of the family estrangement that had already resulted from my military career choices. Accepting Project Sentinel assignment would make reconciliation impossible, while providing work that could utilize my analytical capabilities at levels that conventional military service could never offer. The classified materials revealed analytical challenges that combine technological sophistication with strategic complexity in ways that would require every aspect of my education, training, and professional experience. The work involved understanding adversary decision-making processes, predicting behavioral patterns, and developing countermeasures that could protect democratic institutions from hybrid warfare campaigns. Your father's research identified analytical requirements that exceed conventional intelligence capabilities, Dr. Thornton explained. Project Sentinel represents the only program equipped to address threats that operate across multiple domains simultaneously, while remaining below thresholds that trigger traditional military responses. The strategic importance of the work was immediately apparent and aligned perfectly with my understanding of contemporary security challenges that conventional military doctrine was not designed to address. The intellectual satisfaction of contributing to defense capabilities that protected democratic institutions would justify personal sacrifices that civilian careers rarely demanded. Dr. Thornton, what timeline governs decision-making regarding Project Sentinel assignment? I asked, understanding that the opportunity represented a fundamental choice about career direction and life purpose that would affect every aspect of my future. Colonel, current threat development requires immediate analytical expertise that cannot wait for extended consideration periods, she replied. Project Sentinel needs senior analytical leadership within 30 days to address emerging adversary capabilities that could affect national security at fundamental levels. The compressed timeline meant that the most important decision of my career would need to be made while processing grief over my father's death and family estrangement that had eliminated normal sources of guidance and emotional support. The choice between conventional military service and deep cover analytical work would define my identity and purpose for decades to come. Your father believed that Project Sentinel offered the optimal utilization of your analytical capabilities and strategic thinking, Dr. Thornton said. His final recommendations emphasized that you possessed exactly the combination of technical expertise and strategic insight that the program requires for success. The emotional impact of learning that my father's final professional act had been advocating for my assignment to the most classified analytical program in the defense establishment was profound and complicated. His support had been based on understanding both my capabilities and the national security requirements that could justify the personal costs that such work demanded. The classified briefing concluded with operational details that revealed the scope of resources and analytical capabilities that Project Sentinel provided to personnel whose expertise qualified them for assignments that operated outside conventional military structures. The program offered unlimited access to intelligence collection systems, advanced analytical tools, and decision-maker briefing opportunities that could influence policy at the highest levels of government. Colonel Mitchell, your father's legacy within Project Sentinel continues through research initiatives that require analytical expertise matching his strategic thinking and technical understanding, Dr. Thornton concluded. Acceptance would represent continuation of work that he considered essential for protecting democratic institutions against adversary strategies that conventional military planning cannot address. The choice being offered represented everything that had drawn me to intelligence analysis and strategic thinking throughout my military career, but accepting would require abandoning any possibility of family reconciliation and committing to social isolation that exceeded even the estrangement that had already resulted from my service choices. Walking back through the secure facility toward the exit, I understood that the decision about Project Sentinel assignment would determine not only my career trajectory but fundamental questions about identity, purpose, and the relationship between personal fulfillment and service to others that had shaped every major choice throughout my adult life. The opportunity promised intellectual challenges and strategic contribution that could honor my father's legacy while utilizing analytical capabilities that conventional military assignments might never fully develop. However, acceptance would also mean embracing isolation and secrecy that would make normal human relationships impossible for the remainder of my career. The flight back to Germany provided 8 hours of reflection time, during which I could process the implications of Dr. Thornton's briefing and the revelation that my father had been working to position me for analytical assignments that he considered essential for national security, but knew would require personal sacrifices that few people were willing to make. The decision would need to be made within days of returning to Ramstein, during a period when grief over my father's death and family estrangement created emotional complexity that was difficult to navigate. The choice represented the culmination of every lesson he had taught me about duty, service, and the responsibility to utilize capabilities for purposes larger than personal comfort or social acceptance. The decision about Project Sentinel consumed every waking moment during my return flight to Germany. By the time I landed at Ramstein, I had reached a conclusion that felt both inevitable and terrifying. I would accept the assignment that would honor my father's legacy while severing the last connections to the family that had already rejected me. The encrypted communication I sent to Dr. Thornton was brief and decisive. Request immediate processing for Project Sentinel assignment. Ready to begin transition procedures upon confirmation. The message represented the culmination of 12 years of military service and the acceptance of responsibilities that would define the remainder of my professional life. Her response arrived within hours, containing instructions for discreet departure from NATO assignment and transition protocols that would establish my new identity within the classified program structure. The operational security measures were more comprehensive than anything I had experienced, including detailed procedures for eliminating traces of my previous military service from accessible records. Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez accepted my departure request with the professional understanding that characterized special operations leadership when personnel were reassigned to classified programs beyond his clearance level. "Mitchell, your contributions to NATO intelligence have been exceptional," he said during our final meeting. "Whatever assignment you're transitioning to will benefit from your analytical capabilities and strategic thinking." Master Sergeant Walsh, Captain Mueller, and Lieutenant Commander Petrov gathered for an informal farewell that acknowledged our collaborative success while respecting the security restrictions that prevented discussing my future assignment. Their professional recognition provided some emotional compensation for the family relationships that my career choices had destroyed. "Colonel, your leadership during the cyber threat investigation demonstrated exactly the kind of analytical excellence that advances alliance security," Walsh said. "Your strategic thinking prevented what could have been the most successful hybrid warfare campaign in NATO history." The transition to Project Sentinel required 3 weeks of intensive briefings, security processing, and identity establishment that would enable deep cover operations within the civilian analytical community. The program's resources exceeded anything available through conventional military assignments, including access to intelligence collection systems and analytical tools that operated at the cutting edge of technological capability. Dr. Thornton's final briefing outlined my new responsibilities as Senior Strategic Analyst for Hybrid Threat Assessment, a position that would require coordinating multi-domain intelligence analysis while briefing senior government officials whose policy decisions affected national security at fundamental levels. The work represented exactly the kind of strategic contribution that had motivated my military career from its beginning. "Your father's analytical frameworks provide the foundation for your initial assignments," she explained. "Project Sentinel requires extending his research into contemporary threat development while developing countermeasures that can protect democratic institutions from adversary strategies that operate below traditional military response thresholds." The intellectual challenges promised by Project Sentinel exceeded anything available through conventional career progression, but the personal costs were equally extreme. Accepting the assignment meant embracing social isolation that would make family reconciliation impossible, even if my relatives were willing to overcome their current estrangement. However, 3 days before my official transition to Project Sentinel was scheduled to begin, an encrypted message arrived that would change everything about my understanding of family dynamics and my father's final wishes. The communication originated from my brother Marcus, through channels that suggested he possessed security clearances far exceeding anything his defense contracting work should have required. "Sarah, we need to meet immediately to discuss Dad's final instructions regarding family circumstances and your career decisions," the message read. "Information exists that Mom and Rebecca don't know about, but that affects your current situation and Dad's actual wishes regarding your military service and family relationships." The revelation that Marcus possessed knowledge about our father's classified work and my career circumstances suggested family complications that extended beyond the personal tensions I had understood. His request for immediate meeting implied that my exclusion from the memorial service had been based on incomplete information about our father's actual wishes and priorities. The secure meeting location that Marcus specified was a civilian facility in Washington that provided compartmented discussion capabilities for classified matters. His ability to arrange such meetings indicated involvement in defense programs that exceeded his acknowledged civilian employment, and suggested that family understanding of my military career had been more complex than their rejection had indicated. Sarah, Dad's final months involved extensive conversations about your career trajectory and the family tensions that had developed around your military service, Marcus explained during our meeting. He was working to prepare Mom and Rebecca for disclosures about his classified work and your potential assignment to programs that they couldn't understand without appropriate security clearances. This revelation transformed my understanding of the family dynamics that had led to my exclusion from the memorial service. Rather than simply rejecting my military career, the situation had involved my father's attempts to manage classified information that affected both his legacy and my future, while protecting family members who lacked security clearances. Dad understood that your analytical capabilities qualified you for assignments that would require complete separation from family relationships, Marcus continued. However, he was also working to establish procedures that would enable limited contact through security-cleared family members who could serve as intermediaries for appropriate communication. The disclosure that my father had been developing plans for maintaining family connections despite Project Sentinel's security requirements created possibilities that I had not imagined existed. His final months had been spent balancing national security obligations with family relationships in ways that could preserve both my career opportunities and essential emotional connections. Marcus, what specific arrangements had Dad established for family communication during classified assignments? I asked, understanding that his security clearances enabled discussions that normal family members could never access. He arranged for Mom and Rebecca to receive security briefings that would enable them to understand the importance of your work without compromising operational security, he replied. The briefings were scheduled to occur after his memorial service to minimize emotional complications during the grieving process. This revelation explained the timing of my exclusion from the memorial service in ways that transformed rejection into protection. My father had been orchestrating family preparation for my transition to Project Sentinel while ensuring that classified information did not complicate the ceremony honoring his military service. Sarah, the Pentagon officials who attended Dad's memorial service were there to implement his final instructions regarding family security briefings and your career transition, Marcus explained. Their arrival represented the beginning of processes that Dad had established to maintain family relationships despite the security requirements of your new assignment. The understanding that Pentagon officials had attended my father's memorial service to execute his plans for protecting both my career opportunities and family connections created emotional complexity that was difficult to process. His final act had been ensuring that national security requirements and personal relationships could coexist through carefully planned security arrangements. The officials identified themselves to Mom and Rebecca as representatives seeking, quote, General Mitchell, Marcus continued. Dad's final promotion and assignment to Project Sentinel advisory positions were classified at levels that prevented normal military recognition, but the Pentagon wanted to ensure that his contributions received appropriate acknowledgement. This disclosure revealed that my father had achieved flag officer rank through classified channels while establishing the analytical programs that I was now being invited to lead. His support for my military career had been based on personal experience with the kind of strategic work that Project Sentinel represented. Marcus, how did Mom and Rebecca respond to the Pentagon officials and the security briefings about Dad's classified work? I asked, understanding that their previous rejection of my military career had been based on incomplete information about the strategic importance of defense analytical work. The briefings transformed their understanding of both Dad's legacy and your career significance, he replied. Learning about the national security implications of analytical work that they had considered abstract and meaningless changed their perspective on military service and its importance for protecting democratic institutions. The revelation that my family's opposition to my military career had been based on misunderstanding rather than fundamental disagreement about values and priorities created possibilities for reconciliation that I had believed were permanently destroyed. Their security briefings had provided context that conventional military communication could never convey. Sarah, Mom and Rebecca want to meet with you to discuss their new understanding of your work and Dad's wishes regarding family relationships during your transition to classified assignments, Marcus said. The Pentagon officials provided communication procedures that enable appropriate contact while maintaining operational security requirements. The opportunity for family reconciliation based on accurate understanding of my career significance and our father's legacy represented everything I had hoped for throughout 12 years of military service. The prospect of maintaining family connections while pursuing analytical work that honored his memory seemed almost too valuable to believe possible. The meeting with my mother and sister occurred at the same secure facility where Marcus and I had discussed our father's classified legacy. The controlled environment enabled conversations about my career and its strategic importance that security restrictions had previously prevented. Sarah, we owe you an apology for misunderstanding the importance of your military service and the significance of the work that Dad valued so highly, my mother said, her voice carrying the weight of months of family tension and emotional complications. The Pentagon briefings revealed that your analytical capabilities contribute to national security in ways that we had never understood or appreciated. Rebecca's response reflected a similar transformation in her understanding of military service and its relationship to protecting the values and institutions that civilian life depended upon. Sarah, learning about Dad's classified work and your potential assignment to programs that continue his legacy changed our perspective on everything we thought we knew about military service and its importance. The family reconciliation that followed was complicated by the security requirements that would govern my future communication, but it provided an emotional foundation that would enable maintaining relationships despite the constraints that Project Sentinel assignment would require. My father's final planning had achieved the impossible, preserving both career opportunities and family connections. 6 months later, as Senior Strategic Analyst for Project Sentinel, I briefed senior government officials on hybrid threat assessments that protect democratic institutions from adversary strategies that conventional military planning cannot address. The work utilizes analytical capabilities that my father helped develop while honoring his legacy through strategic contribution that justifies every personal sacrifice that military excellence demands. The family relationships that his final planning preserved provide emotional support that enables maximum professional effectiveness, while maintaining connections to the values and principles that motivated my military service from its beginning. His understanding that meaningful contribution requires both strategic capability and personal foundation enabled achieving everything that had seemed impossible to reconcile. The memorial service that I had been excluded from became the beginning of family understanding that transformed rejection into support for work that protects the freedoms and security that civilian life depends upon. The Pentagon officials who arrived looking for General Mitchell were executing his final mission, ensuring that his daughter could serve at the highest levels of national security while maintaining the family relationships that provide meaning beyond professional achievement. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.